Nothing's wrong with you. You're not broken. Suffering just happens to some people. Hey, this is Damon Cart from Life Mastery Gym, bringing you cutting-edge processes, techniques, and mindsets to help you master your life. So if that sounds good, please click subscribe to this YouTube channel so you can get these videos on a regular basis. I suffer nearly every single day. Now you might be thinking that's kind of strange that I would even admit that. Why, if I'm in this business where I'm talking about mastering your life and overcoming obstacles and solving problems and achieving goals, why would I come out and say that I suffer? Or wouldn't I at least want to project the image of being somebody who doesn't have problems and who may have suffered at one time, but I've put it all in my past? Well, that's just not the truth. And I would say for a lot of people who do what I do, or who are in the self-improvement, self-help, and personal development business, that most of them do have problems and suffer. Now, is it possible that there are people who don't suffer at all? In their minds, they don't have problems and they're just happy pretty much all of the time, like that's their natural state of being? I'm sure there is. I'm not going to try to say that no, everybody's like me. I'm sure there are people who are just happy and were born that way and they are that way. And that's a wonderful thing. I wish I could be that way, but I'm not. And I think that most people are probably more like me. Now, what do I mean by suffering? Well, suffering is having feelings, painful feelings that either stick around for a long time or they keep coming up. And for me, I wake up in the morning and sometimes suffering is just there. I have those painful feelings that could be anger, aggression, impatience, sadness, whatever it might be. It's just there. It's like it pops up. It's an endless source of just negative or painful feelings, and it doesn't always happen when I wake up. I could wake up fine, and then later I experience the feeling or the suffering, and it's just there. This has been going on since I was probably a teenager, and some people might say, well, maybe it's biological or hereditary, or maybe I was traumatized when I was a child. I don't have any recollection of real sort of childhood trauma. And for the biological and the hereditary part of it, that's actually, that would make a good argument. My younger brother battled addiction for years and died of an overdose. My older brother has suffered from severe depression for long periods of time. So that may be the case. And that's where I started looking at my suffering and thinking, well, I need to get to the bottom of this. I need to get to the source of this. And so I went going through that route of looking at, well, is it biological? I never took antidepressants. I never got on medication. But what I did do is I self-medicated, like a lot of us do. And I rode the edge, let's say, of addiction when it came to booze and drugs. This is earlier on in my early 20s. And in that moment, when you're inebriated, it can feel like there's that relief and that's an answer to the suffering. But then you realize when you come down, the suffering is even worse. And then you have to go back and do that more and more. But every time you come down, it gets worse and worse. So I could clearly see the pathway of addiction. And so I made a different choice. I started doing healthy practices. I started doing yoga. I started writing. I started meditating. And all these things helped quite a bit. I also started learning NLP. And that was the most powerful for managing my suffering and these feelings. That was probably the most powerful technology that I have learned so far. And I even studied non-duality, which is more on a philosophical level, but it deals with suffering. It's very similar to Buddhism. And I've done some Buddhist practices and I've studied Zen somewhat. What I've come to just accept is that I have this suffering. It's there no matter what practices I do, no matter how much transformational personal development I do, it's still there. So what I've come to realize is that it doesn't matter if I have suffering. That doesn't stop me from being happy. And I can honestly say I'm an extremely happy person. I'm the happiest I've ever been in my adult life, and I continue to get happier. So how can I suffer and still be happy? It's very easy now to think about it. Then it wasn't so easy, but now it actually is. So first start off by thinking that you've known people, I'm sure, and you may be one of these people who suffers physical pain, some sort of chronic physical pain. That doesn't necessarily stop you from being happy. Now, if you focus on the pain and you put all your attention on the pain, then the suffering seems, you become your suffering. You start to identify with your suffering. And it's no different with emotional pain or whatever you want to call the feelings of suffering. When I wake up, and if it's there, or I'm just going through my day and suffering arises, I don't go to that and focus on it and say, I got to get to the bottom of this. I got to change it. I got to transform it. I can transform it, and I do it, but I don't start there. I don't focus in on it and try to go deep into it. I used to do that, trying to get to the bottom of it, and it only made it worse. Now what I do, and this is what I recommend that you do if you suffer, is first of all, know that you have choice about it. You don't have to identify with your suffering. You don't have to focus on your suffering. You can step back from your suffering. Now, that's very different than disconnecting from it and trying to push it away. That will only make it come back worse. That will create a shadow, and then what is in your shadow, what is unconscious, has influence and control over you that you don't realize because it's unconscious. Now, this is not what you want. But what you do want is you want to open up your perspective. You want to know that you have choice about how you deal with the suffering. And how you do that first is just by accepting it. I used to have a hard time accepting my suffering because of the possible implications of what it said about me, of what that means about me, and that this is a form of identification. So I would say, oh, I can't suffer, I'm not supposed to suffer. That might mean that I'm unworthy, I'm broken, I'm a bad person, I'm inadequate. So all these things used to go through my mind whenever I would suffer. Like, what's wrong with me? And you probably hear people say that, and you probably said that yourself. Nothing's wrong with you. You're not broken. Suffering just happens to some people. So accept it, and then accepting it, first you get some relief from that. Just saying, yeah, I have suffering, and it's okay. And then take it further and realize that suffering is not the only thing that you're feeling. You've got a lot of feelings that are happening all at once that you're probably not paying attention to. So if you zoom in and focus in on the suffering, yes, that will seem like the totality of your being and what you're feeling. But if you open that up and say, okay, yeah, that's happening, suffering is happening, I have that feeling, but I also have all these other feelings. You can step back from the suffering, and remember what I said, don't disconnect. Just step back from the suffering and say, okay, what do I want to do with this? And suffering takes up energy. So if you think about the energy from excitement, you could say, well, excitement takes up more energy than suffering. Probably so, but that excited energy builds on itself. Suffering energy is draining, and it brings you down. You can take that energy and you can transform it. You can use it to drive you, and that's what I do. So if I feel suffering, then I say, okay, what do I want to do instead? How do I want to feel instead? And then I use that suffering to drive me. And if you notice some of the people on my wall behind me, when I started thinking about making this video, I looked at these people and I realized that pretty much all of them have that in common. All of the people behind me, some of them are artists, well, most of them are artists. All of them have that in common, where they suffered and they used suffering for their artistic endeavors, so their artistic pursuits, and they created beauty out of their suffering. Now, you don't need to be an artist to do this. You can be creative with your suffering, and it doesn't mean you're going to become a famous writer or actor or any of those things, but you can certainly use it for creative pursuits. But you don't have to. You can use your suffering to drive you to work on cars or play tennis, any of these things. If you just leave your suffering there, if you just wait for it to pass, which a lot of people do, you can do that, but it usually sticks around for a long time if you do that. So use it. It's energy that's not being used. Use it to drive you. So First, accept it. Take a step back. Notice what other feelings you're feeling, so it puts the suffering in perspective. And then say, okay, what do I want to feel instead? And how can I engage in life in such a way that it transforms that suffering into something useful, creative, or maybe a goal that I want to achieve, maybe a career that I want to take on, a new career. I'm going to use that suffering because I'm not happy in my current career to drive me to create the career that I want to have. My mentor, Steve Andreas, who just recently passed away, used to say to me that transforming something is a lot easier than starting from scratch. So instead of trying to create a new you, it's easier to transform the you that you already are. And I think the same goes for feelings. Instead of trying to get rid of your suffering, which is what I tried to do for years, and it didn't work, and it only made me suffer more, and it took up a lot of energy and a lot of effort and time, instead of trying to get rid of it, transform it. Now, this is a big discussion, not to be covered in just one video. So starting next week, I'm going to create a series of 3 videos where I'm going to go more in depth about how to transform not just feelings, but also how to transform at the identity level. So check out my website, lifemasterygym.com. There you will find some free NLP training, some free hypnotic inductions, and who knows, I might be throwing some other free stuff in there pretty soon. So make sure you check out the website. Also, if you want to check me out on Facebook to get real-time updates on whatever it is that I'm up to, check out the Facebook site. And last but not least, make sure if you like this video that you click like and that you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you can be notified. And one more thing, leave a comment down below about your suffering and what you've done to overcome it, or if you feel stuck in your suffering, put a comment down below or ask a question. I would love to hear from you, and I will definitely respond. So anybody who leaves a comment or asks a question, I will respond. So leave me a comment or a question. Tell me a little bit about you and how you've suffered and how you've dealt with it or how you've overcome it. Take care.